Welcome back. We are in the middle of chapter 16. Ruby carried my suitcase this time, and I carried my backpack and the jar of jelly beans out to the car, which was parked at the top of the driveway. I got in the back seat and Ruby got in the front so she could start the engine and turn on the heater. "Do you need me to come back there and sit with you?" she asked over the back of the seat. I would have liked that, but I shook my head no. "Do you have any brothers or sisters?" she asked me. "No," I said. "Do you?" "One sister, Jill. She lives in North Branch." "You have kids?" I asked. I thought I saw a shadow cross her face. "No," she said. "No kids." Neither of us said anything after that. The car heated up quickly, and the combination of the warmth and the hum of the heater made me feel drowsy. I rested my head against the back of the seat, closed my eyes, and fell asleep. I didn't wake up until we pulled into the Franklins' driveway, and Roy turned the engine off. Even though I was awake, I sat there with my eyes still closed. "Should we wake her up, or do you want to just try and carry her inside?" Ruby whispered. "What do you mean, try?" said Roy, pretending to be insulted. "She's just a little slip of a thing." Ruby laughed. She had a nice laugh, musical, like the wind chimes Bernie and I made once from a kit she ordered through the mail. I don't remember ever having been carried before that, though of course I know both Mom and Bernie must have carried me plenty when I was little. Roy picked me up out of the back seat and carried me into the house. And I don't think I breathed once the whole time. Just clung tight to that jar of jelly beans, which clicked and clattered as they knocked against each other. The only other sound was the soft soof of his shoes as he carried me carefully up the steps, across the porch, and into the house. I was sorry when he put me down, sorry to have to open my eyes. It felt so good to be taken somewhere by somebody, instead of having to get there on my own. Roy and Ruby lived in a white house with yellow shutters and window boxes all across the front. There was a screened-in porch on the side and a white rope hammock slung between two trees in the yard. Ruby showed me the little back bedroom where she said I could change out of my dirty clothes. Before I did that, though, I asked Roy what Thurman Hill had told him back at Hilltop. "Nothing. Said he wouldn't talk to me without his lawyer present, so I'll have to go back up there tomorrow to see what's what," he told me. "Now go get changed so Rube can put dinner on the table." I'd been changing my underwear and socks each day since I'd left Reno, like Bernie had told me to, but I'd been wearing the same jeans and t-shirt and the red sweater ever since I left home. What I really wanted was a hot bath, but I was too shy to ask, and besides, I was starving. I shoved my dirty clothes into the corner of my suitcase and pulled on some clean ones. I tried to run a comb through my hair, but I hadn't combed it in so long it was really tangled, so I left it. When I went back out to the living room, Roy was sitting on the couch reading the paper. Ruby came out of the kitchen drying her hands on her apron. "If I'd known earlier you were coming, Heidi, I would have made something ahead of time. As it is, frozen pot pies will have to do. I'll make up for it with breakfast tomorrow, though, I promise. Dinner in about 5, you two," she said, and went back into the kitchen. Roy looked at me and smiled. "She's no slouch in the kitchen," he said. "Did you ask Thurman Hill how come Elliot knows my mother's word?" I asked. "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, I guess," Roy laughed. "Bernadette teach you to get right to the point, did she?" I shrugged. "Did you ask him?" I asked again. "Tomorrow, Heidi," he said in a tone I knew. When Bernie used it, it meant not to ask again. We ate at a round wooden table in the kitchen. There were placemats with pictures of horses on them, and the paper napkins had flowers printed around the edges and were folded into triangles under each fork. I sat between Roy and Ruby. The pot pies were filled with turkey and vegetables, the thick buttery crusts oozing gravy from little tear-shaped slits cut through the top. There was salad and cottage cheese and little bowls of applesauce sprinkled with cinnamon sugar. I was so hungry there was hardly a second my mouth wasn't stuffed too full for me to talk. For dessert, Ruby dished out 3 big bowls of strawberry ripple ice cream, but I only made it halfway through mine before I ran out of steam. "You look bushed," Roy said. "Well, it's no wonder. She's been sleeping on a bus for the past 3 nights. I'll run you a bath, Heidi, and then you can go to bed," Ruby said. "Can I call Bernadette first?" I asked. "I'll call collect." "Course," said Ruby. "You show her where, Roy." Ruby went to run the bath, and Roy took me into his den to use the phone. We only talked for a minute. I told Bernie that Ruby and Roy were being really nice to me and that I was going to take a bath and go to bed. She seemed relieved to hear it. "I'm not going to worry about you tonight, Heidi-ho," she said. "Sounds like you're in good hands." Mama called for Bernie in the background. "I'm coming, precious," she called back. "Your poor Mama's had a headache all day long today, the worst one ever." "Well, kiss her for me," I said, adding, "and tell her that I love her, Bernie." Since love was not one of the words that Mama said, it wasn't a word I used very often either. For some reason that night, though, maybe because of the longing Roy had stirred up when he'd carried me in from the car, I wanted Mama to know that I loved her. "I'll tell her," Bernie promised. When I came out of the den, Roy was waiting for me. "You got something to sleep in, or do you need to borrow something? I got a big old flannel shirt might do, or Rube's probably got something frillier you could borrow if you want." I told him I had something in my suitcase and started to go back to the little bedroom where I had changed earlier. Roy stopped me. "Heidi, does the name Demuth ring a bell at all?" he asked. "Demuth?" I said. "Diane Demuth. Ever heard that name?" he said. "I don't think so. Who is she?" I asked. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Ruby's been running those taps for a while now. You better run along now and get ready for your bath." I went to my room and opened my suitcase, digging around until I found the nightgown I'd packed. I fished my toothbrush out of the pocket of my backpack and went down the hall to the bathroom. Ruby had run the bath so hot, steam was floating up out of it, and she'd put in enough bubbles to make it foam up like whipped cream. I'd seen pictures of bubble baths in magazines, but I'd never actually had one. Once, when I had chickenpox, Bernie put oatmeal in the bath water to help with the itching, but that was lumpy, not like the bubble bath at all. I spent a long time soaking, and when my fingers were completely pruned and the bubbles had died down to a thin soapy film, I got out and dried off. I brushed my teeth and put on my nightgown and tried to comb through my wet hair, but it was even more tangled now than it had been before. I gave up. At least it was clean. Roy and Ruby weren't around when I came out, and I felt too shy to go looking for them or to call out their names, so I went back to the little bedroom, dug my notebook and pen out of my backpack. I carried them over to the wooden bed and lay down on top of the covers. Then I flipped through the pages until I found the "Things I Don't Know About Mama" list. "What is Soof?" was all that it said, and below that I wrote, "Why does Elliot know Mama's word?" I was too tired to write more, so I closed the book and slipped it under the pillow. Then I pulled back the covers and slid down between the crisp, cool sheets. I turned off the light and was already halfway asleep when there was a soft knock on the door, and a wedge of pale light unfolded into the room. Ruby stood in the doorway. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Mm-hmm," I told her drowsily. "Need anything? A drink of water? Another blanket?" she said. What I wanted right then was for her to come and sit on the edge of the bed, to read to me or scratch my back or talk to me the way Bernie always did at bedtime. On the bus, sleeping had just happened when it happened, sometimes in the daytime, sometimes at night. But there, lying in a real bed like that in a real room, I wanted to be tucked in. "I'm fine," I said, and wondered if that counted as a lie. "Good night, then," Ruby said. "Sleep tight." "Ruby," I said as she started to pull the door closed. "Yes, Heidi?" "These sheets feel different from the ones at home. Stiffer." "They're line dried," she said, "out and back." "They smell like sky," I said. "I would never thought of putting it like that," Ruby said softly. "Good night, Heidi." I fell asleep that night thinking about all the people I knew in the world, Mama and Bernie and everyone else from home. But now I also knew Georgia and Roy and Ruby and Elliot. Their faces began to jumble together in my head, tumbling like jelly beans down the smooth sides of a glass jar. Right before I drifted off, I turned over, and as my bare legs slid under the stiff sheets, I heard Elliot's voice calling to me. Soof. Roy came in to say goodnight. I heard him, but I was too far away by then to answer. I had followed the sound of Elliot's voice into the dream that lay waiting for me on the other side. It was about Thurman Hill's watch. He came into my room holding one hand out to me, the cold white fingers closed tightly around something I couldn't see. His sleeve pulled up as he reached out, and I saw his bony wrist with the gold watch. The face of the watch was blue, but there were no numbers on it, just 4 letters, SOOF, 1 letter each at 12 o'clock, 3, 6, and 9. Show me what's in your hand, I said. He smiled and shook his head. You'll never know, he whispered back. Then he turned into a huge white bird with pale sea glass eyes and flew out the window. And that's the end of chapter 16.